My name's Eric Krum. For those of you that don't know me, what we're going to do today is, or this evening, depending upon when you're watching this, we're going to go ahead and turn a lidded box, specifically one of these. I have a wood collection. I don't know if you can see behind me. That's just a very small part of it. That's future lidded boxes. So I went to every lidded box class that I could to learn to turn them. I had turned a few and I said, I'm going to take my wood collection and make boxes. So I went to those classes and then I started making them. And after a couple of hundred, I came up with a methodology that I'm going to show you. So I'm going to take this piece of rosewood and make an identical box. So, for those of you that were listening to the presentation, I gave a slideshow that talks about lidded boxes, end grain, side grain, orientation, and that slideshow, if you didn't get a chance to see it before this, is available on the website. I recommend that you watch it first and walk through the slides because it'll give you a lot of details that I'm not going to talk about today. So up on the website also will be a 2-page step-by-step set of instructions that'll walk through. I found that, hey, I watch a slideshow, I watch the demonstration, and then maybe I remember 20%. So I like having a step-by-step procedure so that 6 months after this class, I can go ahead and get a refresher and then walk through and do it. So that'll also be available. So I'm going to get getting started. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is put the wood. I usually use a 3" by 3" by 3" cube to make the boxes. So put it in the chuck, going to turn it around, clean the face off, and then I'm going to walk through the next steps after that. So now that it's round, what I'm going to go ahead and do next is I'm going to part the lid. I usually measure down 9/16 of an inch. Make the lid parting a little over 1/4 inch because of the 1/4 inch lip, and then you have to have it 1/16 to cut in. Alright. Now I cut in 2 different ways. I use a 1/16 inch parting tool, and if the wood is really hard and I'm worried about the tool pinching, I go ahead and actually use a hacksaw to finish parting off the lid. Wishart.
All right.
Hey, that's a good thing to watch. So, I don't know how well the camera caught the catch, but I chose this wood because A, it's dry, really hard, and as you can see, it's kind of brittle. But it's also, when done, really pretty. So, that's the way it goes, and that's why you wear a helmet. Although it didn't hit my helmet, it did hit my hand. But I'll live. One of the things I didn't mention, though, and I would like to take the time to do that, is when you put the line in, what you're doing is you're making it look like there's more than one lid, because you're not going to hide a line where the lid is, okay? So you might just as well make it a feature in the box. So I usually put 1 or 2 extra lines in, and some people burn them in, but I think that looks burnt. Okay, so I usually put a small saw on it. Never do this, always do the back, because that way the centrifugal force would let it to dig in versus flipping in out. And then cut a shallow line in it. Okay, it looks like you're not sure which is the lid. It just makes it prettier, I think. So I'm going to go ahead and now sand this, okay, and then I'm going to part the lid off. And since this wood is really hard and brittle, I'm really worried about the parting tool getting pinched in the wood, so I'm going to go ahead and use the hacksaw. Most of the time I'll go in, straight in about a 1/4 inch, pull it out, and then go into the lid a 1/2 inch, pull it back out, go straight in, another 1/4 inch, pull it back out, go into the lid. Okay, that way it reduces the chance of a pinch. Okay, but this wood is so hard that I'm really worried about it. So I'm going to go ahead and use the hacksaw. So the next step, as you can see, I went and sanded it down to 400 grit, and the last step of sanding is to sand with the grain both on the top and down on the sides. So it's ready to be parted. So I'm going to go ahead and use the hacksaw since this wood is kind of hard, and turn it on a low speed. Use the back of the blade. I'm going to go ahead and set the lid aside until we're ready to finish it. Alright, next we're going to go ahead and hollow out. I usually use a drill bit, as you can see today, a Forstner bit, and I'll go down and I'll take the bit. I usually like a 1/4 inch deep bottom, so I'll put the very, very tip where I want it and then figure out where it's going to go. So it's about a 1/4 inch from this lip of where I'm going to stop drilling. So you keep in mind you have to keep the depth at the tip. A lot of people keep thinking of the blade and forget about the tip, and then all of a sudden they realize they got a little dimple in the bottom. Alright, now that we've drilled it out, I find it easier to drill it than going ahead and trying to use a turning tool to hollow it out completely from scratch. I'm going to go ahead and use a square nose scraper. Right? And I make sure that it has a really good burr, because you really want to cut, not scrape. And a good burr will allow you to do that. The other thing is, periodically I'm going to go ahead and blow it out. I find that this tube is a lot easier to use, except for one thing. You make sure you breathe in before putting the tube up to your mouth, so you don't suck in the sawdust. But it does a really good job. And I don't have the vacuum on right now, but when I turn the vacuum on, when I'm blowing it out and hollowing, you're going to see I put my hand over it so that when I blow, sawdust comes out and then goes into the vacuum. So, all right. One other item, and that is that this has a collar on it, the tool rest. That way it's automatically on the center, which when you're first turning with a scraper, you want to be at the center line. All right? And as you go in, with the center line, it gets lower and lower. So what you need to do is either pull the rest up as you get deeper, or I just start it with being higher. Okay, so I start up a little off center, and then by the time I get to the bottom, I'm right at the center. All right. So as you just saw, I turn about an 1/8 inch off at a time. If you put the entire 1 inch of your flat nose scraper into the wood at the same time, you're guaranteed to catch. Alright, so normally, if it's a softish wood, medium density, I'll turn a 1/4 inch off at a time. The hard wood like this, I do about an 1/8 inch, as you saw. The other thing I'm going to do is do the bottom. Right now it's got a dimple in the bottom from the drill bit, okay? And I'm going to go ahead and put the corner in at an angle, and then scrape it sideways. And what I've done is I've actually made sure that this corner here is sharp. Okay, so I've actually turned it here and sharpened it here in the front. And when that's done, then I'm going to go ahead and use the skew. Now the part on the skew, as I showed on the slideshow, is I'm going to actually use the burr on the edge here. All right? And so I'll tilt it at a 45-degree angle and go in and let that burr clean the sides off. And now that we've got the box hollowed out and the bottom is flat, I'm going to go ahead and sand it. Okay, I normally use drill bit. It's just safer and easier to get the bottom with the tool. And I'll start at 80 and go down to 240, and then I'll grease sandpaper and go ahead and sand the sides. So the chapter sponsored a hands-on workshop, and there were about 6 students running 6 lathes, and I gave a class or a session on the lid box. So I went through one step and then they repeated it, and when it came time to sanding, I figured everybody sands. I didn't need to say anything. Some people went through and one thickness and stuck it in, and pretty soon their fingers got hot. Most people folded it in half and then sanded with 2. However, it still gets hot. So this is something I learned long ago. Fold it in half, put a crease, fold it down to the middle where you have paper to paper. So you always want paper to paper or facing to paper. You never want the facing to a facing. because then it'll sand itself. All right. And then fold it over. With 4 thicknesses, it'll control the heat a lot better. And if you're actually feeling where your fingers are getting too hot, it's time to stop and let the wood cool off, because a lot of species of wood will actually crack when they get hot. A perfect example is lignum vitae. I actually completely destroyed one. It got hot, and I just kept sanding. And then when I turned it off to check it out and to go to the next grade, it looked like a spider web. So it's very, very heat sensitive. It's not unique. There are a lot of woods like that. So again, if it gets hot, let it cool off. All right, so the next step is, now that it's done sanding inside, outside, I'm going to go ahead and get it ready to mount to take off the bottom. And the way I do that is I put tape on it, painter's tape. Now, a hardwood at minimum 3 layers. The softer the wood, the more layers, because you want to put your chuck where it's going to move and grab the wood safely. Chucks are important. I've been doing this so long that when I started turning, the only chucks were available were Vicmark out of Britain and the one-ways out of Canada. One-ways are a little more expensive, but there's something that's important when you're doing boxes like this. You'll notice that one-way has all the corners cut off. Most of the other vendors, that's a sharp corner. So the first time I actually used a chapter lathe to give this class, and I used their chucks, when I gripped it, the corners put a dent in the wood. And unfortunately, it was a really expensive wood, and I was giving it away at the end of the demonstration, which I did give it away. So I really felt bad it put dents in. So if you look at the chapter chucks, all the corners are ground off. Use a file, use a ceramic grinder, but take the sharp corners off. And when you're tightening it, if you hear a crack, you know you've got it more than tight. Basically, you touch it, wiggle it, and if it wiggles, tighten it a little more. Same thing, got tailstock against it. I'm just going to use the roughing gouge to turn the corners down and then pull out the bowl gouge and smooth it off. All right, as you saw, I went ahead and took the corners off with the tailstock on it. Okay, and I keep the tailstock on it because you never know about the tape and the hardness of that wood. Now this is really, really hard wood, so I felt fairly comfortable that it was going to hold, but some of the softer woods like walnut, medium density woods, the tape sometimes holds, sometimes it doesn't, so it's good to have the tailstock on there, but you can't get to the very center, okay? So I do a really light cut just to get that knob off the center that's underneath the tailstock. Now the other thing is to making sure that the bottom is flat or that it's dimpled, meaning it's dimpled in the very center so that the outer edge is where it sits, so that way it won't rock, right? Sits level. So again, you just check it and you make sure that you have a gap in the middle and no gap on the sides. And I don't know if you guys have a signature, but every piece that I have ever turned has 2 little rings and then 2 outer rings. And then what I normally do is I engrave. I used to do a black pen indelible. I found out they last about 5 or 6 years. So as a result now, I use a engraver and I engrave my name in and the species of the wood in the outer ring. So if you ever know it's one of mine, look at the bottom and then you'll know for sure. All right, so I've just finished sanding the outside of the box, and the box is done. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is take it off. And I have found out the hard way, always take the key out. Even though you may be getting ready to adjust it, take the key out. You wouldn't believe the number of times I absolutely turned it on and watched the key fly out of the room. All right, the other thing I wanted to mention is tape. I use painter's tape. I used to use when 3M first came out, and then they got thinner and thinner and thinner. It worked better for painting, but it was horrible for turning. So now I go on Amazon or one of the other websites and I look for the cheapest tape I can find because it's thicker. So again, for a hardwood like this, minimum of 3. If it's a softer wood, I usually go 5 or 6 rolls of tape. So the next thing I'll do is grab a set of calipers, measure this, and then I'll sit down on the bench and I'll put the tape on the lid. And again, for a hardwood like this, 3 layers. That usually is sufficient. And you don't have to worry about being short because all the jaws have a gap at the bottom. So, but if you go over and put the tape on the outside, it'll make it wobble. All right. So, alright, next thing is I make sure that the tape is on correct, and then I'll take a pair of scissors and trim it to the top of the lid. And then we're good. Don't over tighten it because again it'll put the lines in the, but you got to make sure that it is tight, that it's not going to spin. So what I'll use now is, hopefully I'll not send it across the room this time, but I'm going to go ahead and use a round nose scraper, usually because you're doing just a little bit of touch, and I check it out, hollow it out, then I'll take a depth gauge and make sure, in fact you can see I had already set it, so it's about 1/8 inch thick top. And I'll go ahead and check. Now some species of wood, especially like this one here that's hard, you can tell when you're getting thin because you'll get a high whine from the wood when you're turning. And if you're getting a high whine, it usually means it's getting really thin. So, round nose scraper, I'll hollow it out, I'll put the calipers on it and put a line on it, and then I'll take the square nose scraper and cut in and flatten out the lid, and then I'll use the skew as I did on the inside to hollow out and smooth off the inside of the lip. So we're done turning. The last thing to do is to sand this, but I want to talk about a few things first. I don't know if you noticed, but I left a little dimple after I measured the depth, and I saw that I needed to go about 1/8 inch deeper based upon the depth gauge. So I left a dimple. When I cut around it, the very, very center, when that dimple gets an 1/8 inch high, I knew that I was down to the right depth, and then I could cut the dimple out and flatten my bottom. It's just a really, really handy technique of when you're trying to gauge depth, don't guess, just leave a dimple or leave a ring. And the other thing is, again, because this is really hard wood, I turned an 1/8 inch, usually on the average, when I went in. Again, that's just for safety. It just reduces the chance of a catch. And even then, you still can get a catch, as I did earlier. whether you want to or not, or even though you plan the best that you can. Again, a lot of that's depending on the wood. Again, this is a really, really hard, really dry wood, so it's easy to get a catch, which is one of the reasons I actually chose it to do this demonstration with. So again, the last thing I did is I used the skew and the top edge of the skew to go ahead and smooth off the bottom. Now, right now, it's a really tight fit, okay? And sometimes you want, oh, it's a vacuum fit. Wow, you can hear it pop. However, if you're using it, it makes it unusable because it's too much pressure. But by the time I get it sanded, it'll now be a loose fit. That's all I'm going to do now is sand it, take the tape off, and goober it. It's done. It's finished. I put one coat of polyurethane on there, Minwax. But I'd like to explain, because I get asked a lot at meetings when I bring things in to show, what do I do to make the wood feel so nice, okay? So I'm going to show you the Krum finish. Play on words, last name, first initial. So what I end up, put one coat of polyurethane on. This one has one coat. Then I'll go ahead and put a paste wax on it. I happen to use Howard's wax, but Minwax paste wax is the other one that I use. It just depends on who's on sale that week. I've tried every other wax on the market and they don't work, but these two, the Howard wax and Minwax paste wax, work great. Alright, so I put a nice layer of wax on it. If I'm going to do a whole series of these, meaning if I buy or make a whole set of boxes, I'll then put the latex gloves on when I do the finish, just because it keeps my hands cleaner. And I hate spending an hour putting polyurethane on my fingers. Supposedly it doesn't have any chemical impact on you, but long exposure, I prefer not to do it. And as you can see from the dried, I put the polyurethane in here, that way it's easy to dip. And about once every 2 or 3 years, I'll re-drill the hole in so I can have a place to put more polyurethane. So, and then I'll do the inside also. So I'll wait it for about 20 minutes, 25 minutes, and I'll wait for it to get slightly tacky, and then I'll just wipe it off. And the combination of the wax and polyurethane gives it a really nice semi-gloss, but more important, it gives it a nice feel. That's it.